January 30th, 1933. I know I always do these reports at the end of the month, but I cannot wait until tomorrow. Events are too big and have happened too quickly. I usually also start with a hook, a top story, or something to grab your attention, which I'm not doing this time, but trust me, you do not want to miss this episode. Let's go. I'm Indy Nadel, and welcome to a special edition of the WWII. Today, covering the political events in Germany in January 1933. John Wheeler Bennett writes, "In the last week of January 1933, the political world of Berlin hummed like an overturned hive. And that is 100% accurate, but I got to lead up to it first. If you'll remember from last time, the November elections saw the Nazis actually lose a bunch of seats in the Reichstag, a major setback that has a lot of people wondering about the party's future. And more of these seemingly endless political machinations saw Kurt von Schleicher get Franz von Papen removed as German Chancellor and be replaced by himself. Von Papen was stunned by Schleicher's betrayal and began plotting his revenge. We left off last time just after Christmas with Nazi party leader Adolf Hitler planning to meet with von Papen. The plan was to meet on January 4th at Nazi party financier Kurt von Schroeder's home in Cologne. This meeting does take place as scheduled. Hitler and Papen arrive separately and are photographed entering, so the meeting does become public knowledge. The meeting lasts for 2 hours. Hitler goes after von Papen for stopping him from becoming Chancellor back in August. But Papen says, "That wasn't me, that was Schleicher. You know, the same guy who got me canned as Chancellor." Nazi propaganda chief Josef Goebbels will write in his diary about this meeting that Papen is dead set against Schleicher, wants to topple and eradicate him, has the old man's ear, even stays with him. The old man being President Music Paul von Hindenburg, who does indeed keep von Papen close by, though I don't believe actually living with him. Hitler says that if there is a new coalition cabinet, he will only join it if he is the Chancellor. Of course, there will be a good spot for von Papen in the cabinet, and even places for some of his allies. Also, of course, they will remove Social Democrats, Communists, and Jews from prominent positions and jobs in German daily life. Pop and Will, I should point out, later claimed that no, the question of Hitler becoming Chancellor is never brought up, but both Schroeder and Goebbels write that it is. Word of the meeting gets out and the papers write. Do they think the point of the meeting was to get Papen to talk Hindenburg into appointing Hitler Chancellor? Chancellor Schleicher reads these reports and asks Hindenburg to tell von Papen to not meet with Hitler anymore, or not meet with him without Schleicher agreeing to it. Hindenburg then tells von Papen in secret to go ahead and continue his dialogue with Hitler. This is Shakespearean level stuff here. Hitler and von Papen on the 6th issue a joint statement in the press saying they are not plotting to bring down the Schleicher government. Papen meets with Schleicher 3 days later to tell him that all he's trying to do is to bring Hitler into the current government. Schleicher does not buy it. There's also this. An equally important result of the Cologne meeting was the material change in the financial fortunes of the Nazi party. Music bankrupt in December 1932, the NS-DAP by the middle of January 1933 was once again in the big money by reason of the fact that industrial magnates had assumed responsibility for the party deficit. Von Papen has always steadfastly denied that he was in any way responsible for this arrangement between the industrialists and the party. The fact, however, remains that the miraculous salvation of the NSDAP from financial ruin dates from the second week in January 1933, that is to say, immediately after the Cologne meeting. Nazi party fortunes were really on the wane in December. They had the very disappointing results in the November elections. They had huge money problems because of paying for campaigning for election after election after election after election. Nazi bigwig Gregor Strasser left the party and there was a fair amount of infighting going on. Getting their finances sorted out is a huge deal for the Nazis. Hitler has been busy after the Cologne meeting, doing a little more campaigning actually in the Free State of Lippe or Lepidmold. This is a tiny German state of like 1,200 square kilometers or so. Just like 40 kilometers by 30, right? He gives speeches beginning in Detmold in 16 little towns and villages there over 11 days. See, there is a local election there this month. And Hitler wants to convince everyone paying attention that the Nazi Party is not in decline after November. The total electorate here is like 115,000 people, maybe a couple thousand more or so. They go to the polls on the 15th, and the Nazi Party is the biggest vote getter, getting 39.5% of the vote, which is up 5% from November, though still less than they got there last summer. Hitler is very happy with this, saying that it shows a resurgence of Nazi popularity. What of Schleicher then? What's he doing in Berlin? Von Schleicher continued in the fatal myopic optimism and the fantastic political ineptitude which characterized his whole chancellorship with inexplicable political necrolia. He resumed negotiations with Gregor Strah the very day of the Cologne meeting. Political necrolia, brilliant writing, but Strah has resigned all of his posts within the Nazi Party and carries no weight at all. Now Hitler meets with von Papen again on the 18th. Okay. There's a guy named Joachim von Ribbentrop, right? He sells wines and he's pretty rich. He's also a Nazi Party member, a fairly recent join, and they meet at his place in the Berlin suburbs. They do not wish anyone to know of this meeting, so they have very high security. Hitler's limo drives straight into the garage, so he enters the house from the backyard unseen, and von Ribbentrop's chauffeur picks up Papen and brings him in. Ribbentrop noted the main issue discussed at the meeting in his diary. Hitler insists on being Chancellor. Papen again considers this impossible. His influence with Hindenburg was not strong enough to affect this. Hitler then told Papen of his reluctance to engage in further talks unless his demand to be made Chancellor was met in full. Papen provocated for the time being because he still thought Hitler could be persuaded to take the post of Vice-Chancellor. They have another meeting the evening of the 22nd, and this is the real pivotal one. The security arrangements to keep it a secret are pretty darn elaborate too. See, it's not just Hitler and von Papen meeting this time, though it is again at Ribbentrop's place. Hindenburg's son, Oskar, is there too, as well as Hindenburg State Secretary Otto Messner. Papen has told President Hindenburg about this meeting beforehand. Messner and Oskar H., with their wives in tow, go to a performance of Wagner's opera Das Leibes Verbot, the ban on love, at the Prussian Opera House Music, and after publicly socializing at the break, slip out when the lights go down again and head to Ribbentrop's. Hitler, before the meeting, gives a big speech at the Berlin Schwarz dedicated to Nazi martyr Hode Wessel, who was shot last January and died of his wounds last February. Earlier in the day, there was an unveiling of a memorial to Wessel at a Berlin cemetery, and Hitler was there to do the honors. He leaves the Sportpalast around 10 p.m. with Wilhelm Frick and Hermann Göring, Nazis we've seen many times before. So, the meeting von Papen tells Hitler that no, Hindenburg is still not convinced that Hitler is suitable to be Chancellor. Hitler says he will only be part of a coalition government in which he is Chancellor, and that when the Reichstag meets, the Nazi Party will absolutely not give Schleicher its support. Here's the thing though, this exchange is pretty brief. And then Hitler and Oskar Hindenburg go into another room for a full hour. There is no record of what is discussed there. But Oskar will later say that Hitler stressed no German government could survive without Nazi support at this point, and that only Hitler could save Germany from civil war. There may be more here though. I'll sidetrack for a sec with a quote. It seems Oskar Hindenburg had other worries at this time. The Social Democrats and Centrum had set up a Reichstag inquiry into dodgy property deals related to the so-called Eastern Aid program, set up to bail out alien junker farming estates. Serious allegations had emerged indicating government funds had been diverted from the scheme to buy property, racehorses, cars, and even luxury goods. Some of those under investigation were friends and relatives of Hindenburg. And Oskar's likely involvement in this scandal may have come to light during further parliamentary scrutiny. This raises the possibility that Hitler promised to shove the Reichstag investigation on the Eastern Aid affair if he became Chancellor. Wheels within wheels. Dinner and champagne follow, though Hitler doesn't drink the bubbly. Then Messner and Oskar Hindenburg leave. In the taxi, Hindenburg says simply, the Nazis must be brought into the government. Poppin will comment once again that they don't discuss the issue of Hitler becoming Chancellor at the meeting, but Ribbentrop's diary entry, which seems to me more likely true, says, "Oh yes, they do." Poppin reports on the meeting to Hindenburg, and in the report does not recommend that Hitler be made Chancellor, knowing how hesitant Hindenburg is to do that. Heck, Hindenburg wants von Poppin to be Chancellor. Chancellor Schleicher gets sideswiped around now when the Nationalist Party withdraws its support for him. He has now alienated every party in the Reichstag from left to right. He was even denounced on the 11th by the Agricultural League for not keeping his promise to raise tariffs on food imports. Now he does get a chance for some real breathing space but blows it. Music on the 20th, Phil Himfrich suggests recessing the Reichstag until the new budget is presented, which would be a couple of months from now. But Schleicher calls for the session to begin tomorrow, the 31st. He still doesn't believe that the Reichstag would bring a vote of no confidence in him to the floor because that would mean yet another expensive election. Schleicher meets President Hindenburg, the 23rd, though just 3 days later, to tell him that his efforts to put together a coalition in the Reichstag that could withstand such a vote of no confidence have failed. That was the task Hindenburg gave him 6 weeks ago. The only alternative to a Hitler-led government, Schleicher told the president, was a military dictatorship. He requested a permanent suspension of the Reichstag through the issue of a state of emergency, an indefinite delay in elections, and a ban on both the NSDAP and the KPD. Schleicher's proposed dictatorship would be kept in power by the army. Hindenburg rejected Schleicher's proposal. Even worse, Schleicher's plan for a military dictatorship was leaked to the press, leading to a general outcry from all of his political opponents. I have not been able to discover who the leak was, but man, that's pretty serious. That does even more damage to Schleicher's government. Hermann Göring meets with Missner the 27th and tells him that the Nazis will oppose any attempts by Schleicher to govern without Reich support. Ribbentrop meets with PP that same day, and Poppin tells him he thinks Hindenburg might now appoint Hitler Chancellor, that it could maybe happen. The next day, the 28th, Schleicher tells his cabinet he's going to try again to convince Hindenburg to dissolve the Reichstag, delay further elections, and allow Schleicher to run things under a state of emergency. If Hindenburg says no, then he will resign. Hindenburg says no. Schleicher and his cabinet resign that day. Hindenburg also points out that Schleicher himself said at the beginning of December that doing as Schleicher now wishes would break the constitution and begin a civil war in Germany. We saw that last time. Hindenburg then meets with his son von Papen and Missner, and they all agree that Adolf Hitler is the only choice for Chancellor that makes any sense. Poppin has convinced Hindenburg that the other right-wing parties, which would be brought into the new government, will restrain Hitler's worst impulses. Hindenburg says, yeah, that has to be the case, but it must be a coalition government with conservatives that can be relied on, and General Werner von Blumberg must become Minister of Defense. Yesterday, the 29th, von Papen meets with Hitler and tells him what's up. And they agree that only 2 other Nazis will be in the National Coalition Cabinet. Wilhelm Frick will be Minister of the Interior, and Hermann Göring, Minister without portfolio, and von Papen will be Vice-Chancellor. Hitler says first thing he'll call for another general election, but will get an enabling act passed in the Reichstag that lets him run things without the Reichstag. He can dispense with them. What a night last night was. Hitler and his entourage heard rumours that Schleicher and his associates at the Defence Ministry were plotting a military coup. Some of the officers had indeed discussed this possibility, but Schleicher firmly rejected it. The Nazi brass sat up at the Kaishof Hotel until 5 in the morning on January 30th, waiting for news and ready for anything. Nothing had happened. Then Hitler had to go to the president's office for his swearing-in. Today at 11:15 a.m., Adolf Hitler and his cabinet ministers enter President Paul von Hindenburg's office. Hindenburg gives a short speech, and at 11 short speech, and at 11:30 a.m., Adolf Hitler takes the oath of office and becomes the Chancellor of Germany. He gives a little speech of his own vowing to uphold the Weimar Constitution. After which there is a brief silence, and then President Hindenburg says, "And now, gentlemen, forward with God."